Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our virtual presentation of Version Zero with author David Yoon and our moderator, Marie Liu. We have signed book plates available for those interested. To request one, please click on the green purchase button directly below the viewer screen. It will take you to our website, and when you are checking out your cart, just make sure to write signed book plate in the order comments so that we can reserve a book plate for you. Also, this event includes an audience Q&A. To ask a question, please use the Ask a Question button at the very bottom of the screen. You can also vote for any questions you find interesting, and they'll make their way to the very top of the list. Okay, so let me introduce our guests, and then we can get started. So David Yoon is the author of Super Fake Love Song and the New York Times bestseller, Frankly in Love, which was a William C. Morris Award finalist and an Asian Pacific American Award for Young Adult Literature honor book. David and his wife, Nicola Yoon, also recently announced the launch of their own YA imprint for love stories starring people of color called Joy Revolution. And joining him tonight is our moderator, Marie Liu, the #1 New York Times bestselling author of the Young Elites, Legend, and Warcross series. So a round of virtual applause, everyone, and we're going to get started. Great. Enjoy the talk, everyone.
Thank you so much, Rita. Thank you, Vroman. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Congratulations, David, on your book coming out.
Thank you.
I loved reading this book so much, even though it gave me...
You mean this book?
Maybe some nightmares. So many questions for you, but I'm so happy for you and, so excited this book is out in the world. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, so let's to get started. So tell us a little bit about your background. And I know you've probably done this a couple of times, but I know that so much of this is coming from your history working in tech, and you've done so many different jobs in tech. So tell us a little bit about the genesis of this story and how it came to be.
I worked for like 12 years in tech. And I started kind of like at the beginning of the internet. I started as a web designer. And that moved into interface design, and we quickly realized that you can't just do interface design without doing user experience design, and that is like thinking about the product from, soup to nuts, marketing and acquisition and all that stuff. Sort of letting the users do what they want to do efficiently, but also getting them to do what the business wants them to do. And so there's a little bit of mind game happening there too. And I worked in like social media. I worked for cybersecurity. I worked for an ad tech company, and not advertising, but ad technology, where they figure out what you are like and then gather all your data, build a profile, and then market at you. and we did that.
Wow.
And everyone I worked with at the company had ad blockers installed. Like, we didn't even believe in our own product. And I like to joke that we were non-smokers working at Philip Morris. Like, it was exactly that. And so that made me realize, like, there's a huge paradox happening here, and I need to write about this,
Mm-hmm. That's so fascinating. And I have heard versions of that from other friends of mine who have worked in tech, who are like working, at Apple, but refuse to let their kids touch an iPhone, or work for an app that is for kids, but won't let their kids, that kind of stuff. So it's really interesting and unsettling. And I find it fascinating. It's something that keeps me up at night. So it was really interesting reading about it.
I mean, it's like the default state of our capitalist culture is really one of constant hypocrisy.
Right.
And it's not anyone's fault. It's just forces way bigger than us are putting us in this position. And I think technology sort of really epitomizes that relationship.
Yeah, and it makes it move faster and faster. And there's really, I don't know. I mean, I've got a bunch of questions about it coming up too. So
cool.
But so I'm really curious how you approached writing this story, because you've written a couple of books in YA that are amazing and beautiful, funny, heartwarming romantic comedies. And this is not that. This is a very adult and a thriller. So how did you go about plotting this? Because it felt so different, and yet very much still your voice. You have this very unique sense of humor that ties in with these really tightly paced plots. So how did you approach writing this? Was it different in terms of like, did you outline? Did you not? Was it just like a one breath, and it comes out?
I did the driving road trip at night outline approach, which is, you know what cities you're going to hit, but all you can see is what's in front of your headlights. So it allows for a lot of spontaneity, but you still know what major plot points you need to hit. And I was really inspired by, I can't not write about love. So like the main character, Max, he's in love with his best friend's girlfriend, and he's pining away for her. Meanwhile, he's like this 20-something, tech genius guy working at a big social media company, and he figures out that they're doing some shady stuff with user data. And so he blows the whistle, immediately gets fired, immediately gets blacklisted in the industry, and he has his crisis of faith because he really thought that technology could make the world a better place.
Right.
And so he's crestfallen, and he embarks on this mission to exact revenge on like the big 5 tech companies through this series of hacks that get crazier and crazier. But that guy, Max, is sort of like my experience in a nutshell, but then taken off into this crazy tangent. And it started out as sort of like this wacky, almost like a horror novel. And Nikki was like, you got to make it about people and not about ideas. It's too much about ideas. So really put the people in it. And then it became much better. So
nice.
Yeah.
Well, Nikki always has wise words.
I know. She's awesome.
She's awesome. That's really interesting because I was going to say that what made this book terrifying and real and felt like the stakes were so high were because of your characters and because of Max and Akiko and this team. And I don't want to give away spoilers, but you really feel for them as it continues and their frustration as they're like throwing themselves at this thing that is so much bigger than any of us and all of us, and there's eccentric billionaires. And so how did these characters come about? And you had mentioned that Max is kind of like a version of yourself in some ways, with your experience tech. Like did you have a favorite character to write? Like did they come very naturally to you?
I kind of like Pilot. Pilot is this reclusive tech billionaire who he's like a Mark Zuckerberg, think of him that way. And he goes into hiding. He just drops out of the scene. But he sees what Max is doing with his hacks. Like Max and the group that he forms, which is called Version 0. So hence the title. But they go into a giant social media company and they turn off all the likes. And so everyone freaks out. They're like, oh, my likes are gone. And this guy, Pilot, comes out of hiding just to talk to Max. And he's like, I built the internet. And I'm ashamed of my creation, and it took me away from my family and my daughter, and I want to atone for my mistakes. So let me help you on your mission. And they join forces. I mean, he winds up having his own agenda that Max doesn't know about, but that's part of this. I don't want to spoil anything. But the reason why Max, responds so well to Pilot is because he's a kid of immigrants, and if you're a kid of immigrants, your parents don't understand what you do. They want a better life for you, but in order for you to get that better life, you need to do something professional. And they're not like, my parents don't understand what I do, and they never have, and they never will.
I know.
You know what I mean? Like,
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
And so Max loves his parents, but he doesn't relate to them. But he relates to Pilot, and so Pilot becomes almost like a surrogate father. And it doesn't work out so well. And that's all
the
I'll say.
Ramifications. There's not too much you can say about it, but Pilot was probably my favorite character out of the book too, just because he's such a complex and mysterious and weird and fascinating character. I really, really loved reading about him. Because I've written about eccentric billionaires too, and they're fun to play with. But I really love that, and
thanks.
Yeah, it made the book that much more unpredictable. Which is why I was curious about your process in writing.
Yeah, totally. And
the outlining and everything.
Once you make it personal, then it's like you can talk about the events. You can talk about ideas through the people. And it just makes a lot more sense than just sort of pontificating about how do we fix the internet. It's not.
Yeah, absolutely. You tackle, and I was gonna say you do an amazing job of walking that line, like showing all the gray areas of humanity. And how the the internet can be this really scary, terrifying, horrible thing, or it can be, this useful tool. But at the end of the day, it is just our creation. It is the Frankenstein, but we're the masters, and you are able to show all of the different angles at which humanity is approaching this thing. So
yeah, and I think that's why I wanted to make Pilot so tormented. And there's also like the big 5 tech company CEOs as well, and they make an appearance. And I really just wanted to hammer home the point that the internet is not some cloud in the sky. It's not like an ethereal plane. It's silicon and electricity and air conditioning and it's software and it's people. It's just a bunch of people sitting around making stuff, and we're all human and we all have our biases. We have idealists and we have money hungry venture capitalists, all in the mix. We have this crazy social experimentation going on. Like I view Uber as like a social experiment. I view definitely bird scooters as a social experiment.
Yeah.
And it can only be possible with technology and venture capital. Those are the 2 major ingredients. And like I just want people to be sort of aware that it's not in a perfect like glossy algorithm system, populated by perfect robots. It's people. Like I used to work in a company, and I sat right across from, I'll just say, a very popular party invite service, and and the guy I would chat with all the time, he was in charge of content moderation, and he'd be like, "Dave, oh my God, look at this! Look at what people are trying to post," and I see a bunch of naked people on the screen. I was like, "Dude, what?" And he's like, "Yeah, they're trying to plan an orgy, and I have to flag it. I can't look at this." And he's like, "Click, click," and I'm like, "Please stop."
You're like, this is not my job. You're the content moderator.
But I literally was doing nothing, and suddenly I'm seeing people's very private photos, and there was absolutely nothing stopping us from like making copies of those photos or like looking up their names. And so this illusion that this technology is perfect and private and you have control is an illusion. And so if there's one thing, it's one thing I realized when I was writing the book, and I would love people to come away with just an awareness, of what you give in order to have the privilege to use technology.
And this idea that things are free, that this is a free service, so we should be grateful that it's free.
No,
not really. You're just not paying with money necessarily.
The adage is if it's free, then you are the product.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's terrifying. And
love it.
It's interesting to think about. You were saying that the internet is a hot mess essentially, and it's made up of people who are just creating things. So do you think that, I always think about this, that is it ever possible for the internet and social, internet 2.0 to be this morally right, or at least morally conscious thing? Or is it fundamentally impossible because the invention of things and the innovation of things is always faster than regulation by at least a few years, probably decades.
Yeah, that's very true.
So is there ever a system where we can even have those 2 things, match up in any sort of way? Or is it always going to be us chasing, forever chasing whatever things people are trying to innovate and make, in the hope that we can make something that is good?
Dude, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know, because like it's sort of a larger question. Ted Chiang, who I worship, he was like,
so good.
he's like, technology and capitalism are so tightly interwoven that you can't tell them apart. And especially with the internet, like it's one and the same. And so you really have to interrogate capitalism,
right?
And interrogate the way that we've chosen to make money in this country. And it really relies on sort of dehumanization and anonymization, and scale. It's like there's no such thing as a mom and pop social network. And like, so I would challenge people to sort of to look at that, look at their desire for a brand recognition. I want to go to a store that I know, no matter what city I'm in. I want to pay the lowest prices. I want to get the same product over and over again. Versus, I want a more human experience, which is I need to look people in the eye. I need to investigate with all my senses to figure out if this is something I want. And that's sort of the question at hand. We just happen to be talking about technology. But it really is a question of scale and anonymization. I mean, cars are like a perfect example. You get a bunch of people, you take away their faces and names, you put them in cars, and you wind up with road rage. It's just that's just what happens. And when things are moving at a scale and speed that is way beyond our native like mental capacity to comprehend and deal with, then you're always going to have unpredictable results.
Absolutely. And very unpredictable results, and I feel like and because it's moving faster and faster, it becomes harder and harder to, like once something comes out of the box, you can't put it back in, and then something else comes out of the box to counter that thing, and then it just keeps like multiplying and multiplying.
Yeah. Totally. And it was bad for me, like when things are really bad, sort of a couple months before the Capitol riot, I would wake up, I'd start scrolling the news, scroll the news all day.
Yeah.
And then right before I went to bed, I would put my phone away. And I was in a constant fight or flight response. And my mental health was like just in the toilet. And so Nikki was like, stop looking at your phone. My therapist was like, don't look at your phone. Don't look at the internet. And so I stopped looking at the internet altogether, like both the good stuff and the bad stuff, like the fun stuff and the news. And I flashed back hard to when I was in high school. Like I meditated and I felt like I was back in my high school bedroom with just pre-internet, just records and tapes and stuff. And that was the last time I had headspace, because there's a sheer volume of information now. It's not, I mean, the technology has given us this fire hose to drink from, and we can't cope. I can't cope. And so like literally turning off the internet made me a happier person. I don't know what does that say,
Yeah, that's true. That's so true. And I'm thinking of a line that Akiko says in the book, where she says that most things are created to solve a problem, but there's like every tech person likes to say that they're in this industry to solve problems. Like that's what we do. We solve problems. But a lot of the creations don't actually solve anything. Is the internet solving a problem that we had, or is it just there because we could do it?
Yeah,
it says like the smartphone didn't actually solve any problems.
Totally, yeah, and it really didn't. Like the internet itself was invented in like the 60s or whatever to make a distributed computer network that the Soviets couldn't attack, and that was a specific problem it was built to solve. But other than that, there was no problem that needed solving. People lived pretty well without the internet. It was fine. Along the way, like it's given voice to a lot of people who needed a voice, which I think is great. But it's also given a voice to people who really don't need a voice, and it's allowed bad actors to have outsized influence. Like QAnon is the perfect example.
Yes.
Of the internet at its worst. 4chan is the internet at its worst. And I did research on 4chan for about an hour, and that's all I could take. I was
man, I hear you. Yeah, because I was doing similar research when I was writing Warcross, and it's when you get to those dark corners of the web, there's really only so much that you can look at before you're like, okay, I am out.
I know for Warcross you must have done some like dark web at least research.
Oh yeah. I read this. I ended up reading a book about the dark web, and I was like, it's dark. That stuff's dark.
There's a reason why they call it dark.
Bad news, yeah. So yeah, the hits we take for writing these books, man.
and our search histories, our poor search histories.
I know. I'm pretty sure we're both blacklisted on, the FBI, the CIA.
The feds are like, watch that guy. Watch Marie Lu.
They're watching the Great British Bake Off, but also they're watching this.
Medieval torture methods. Yeah.
Must be a spy. So, I mean, doing all that research, there's so much of version 0 that is based in reality, obviously. So much so that it reads at times like nonfiction. This is a scathing satire of our real world. how did you decide what to keep in as, reality, and what to change into your fictional reality? Was it a sense of needing catharsis, or the control of being able to show what you wanted to happen, or have some control over it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I really just basically wanted to articulate how tricky the situation is, and how, like, people have asked me, like, what can I do to protect myself online? And I'm like, there's nothing you can do.
Yeah.
If I'm being really honest, there is nothing you can do. You can not have a phone and not have the internet. And while you're at it, why don't you ride a horse down the street and, mill your own oats? Like,
Yeah.
this is just the world we're sort of stuck with. And I'm trying to reserve judgment, because I feel like I want to see it as a pendulum. The internet was really, really anonymous before, and now we're more comfortable being ourselves online. So maybe that's a good step. I don't know. I'm not really sure. But I really wrote it from like an anthropological point of view. That's why I made up all the names for like these fictitious companies, and kind of like mixed and matched attributes of each, because otherwise it would just be like instantly dated the second it was published. And I said it deliberately way back in 2018.
Yeah.
So it's a historical piece.
Stone Age.
And then I've kind of peppered in these like David Attenborough moments where, these little asides where he's like, to go viral was considered very popular, and and just explaining these basic concepts that really are dystopian by nature.
Right.
The internet just directly tapping into our primal need for validation and exploiting it. A lot like television exploits our orienting response, that primitive response, like what's happening outside the cave. The internet does that to us on like a very deep level, with just, we want to be liked,
Right.
It messes with that.
It exploits that emotional instinct.
Yeah. So, I mean, it wasn't so much about like trying to find a solution to the internet, or like, because there is no solution. It was more just like exploring like all the things that are actually happening and all the things that could happen. And the question really, like, there's a scene where Max and Akiko are getting dangerously close, because you can tell Akiko kind of likes Max too. And they're talking about, if you could just erase the whole thing and start over and build it again, like how would you make it? And that's an interesting conversation too. But it's ultimately a fantasy,
Right. That is really interesting to think about. I've actually never thought about that. Like what it would be like to build the internet if it wasn't in a capitalist society, or whatever society,
I know, right? How's it going in North Korea?
Not great. Yeah, it's just wondering, like, I don't know. It is a tool. It is a tool that we have. I don't know. Like humans are fascinating creatures.
I know, right? And okay, I got a 16-year-old nephew. He's stuck inside. He's my brother's son. He's stuck inside. Quarantine sucks, and he's on Fortnite every night, talking to his buddies, so he can keep in touch with his friends. And I'm like, so all you need is an internet provider. You need an iPhone. You need a laptop. You need Discord, Nintendo Switch, and that's all you need to have friends. And I'm just like, on the one hand, it's a good thing that he's still talking to his friends, but on the other hand, his literally every utterance is being tracked, and I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, I know. And I remember reading an article a couple of years ago about how this kind of technology has changed fundamentally the way that young people today interact with each other, where like there's so many kids, like they just want to stay home. I remember, when we were in the 90s, or 80s, where you go out to the mall was the place to be. You go to the mall, you just hang out at the mall, and you don't do anything but go and just walk around. And then if you're going to the movies and your friend doesn't show up, you're just like, well, I guess Bob couldn't make it, and then you go to the movie. And now it's like they just don't want to leave their rooms. They're like, why do I need to go outside? I have all of my friends in my room.
Yeah, it's
And
kind of freaky.
and it's freaky, yeah. And some people are like, this is a great thing because, you know, teen pregnancy rates are down and so on. But I'm also like, well, also socialization skills are way down. So yeah, it's I don't know.
That
Yeah.
that part I find really really fascinating.
Mhm,
Is we talk about technology in terms of commerce and whatever
mhm.
and exploitation, but it now has become so tightly interwoven with culture as well.
Yes.
Um, and like Lil Nas X is a perfect example of a guy he's not like a very good musician. His songs are not particularly good, but he excels at being like a court jester, and playing off of what's happening online. And
Mm,
so he doesn't exist without the internet. There is no Lil Nas X without the internet.
mhm,
Um, and he provides that real time kind of soup like
mhm.
commentary, and in an artistic form, and that's why he's so fun to watch. You know,
Right.
but that's like Twitter language, Twitter lingo, emojis,
Mhm.
just whatever's happening on Fortnite. It's all becoming like the Fortnite dances. You know, you see
Right.
kids doing
Right.
those,
Yep.
and it's it's all happening in a sensory deprived
Right.
setting. You know,
Mhm,
there's no smell
mhm,
or energy between people. It's all moderated and
mhm,
mediated through the screen. And I'm wondering the long-term effect of experiencing all of your culture through just this
mhm.
tiny pinhole. Whereas you and I, like, we grew up, you know, before, where you could
Right.
go to the mall
Right.
and we rode our bikes around, and
Mhm.
we were untracked and unsupervised, and we came home when the lights came on, when the street lights came on.
Exactly.
Um, so I'm fascinated to see how these kids turn out. One of the characters in the book is Braden. He's like 18.
Yeah, Braden.
Poor Braden. And he's the
Oh,
kid who was raised by the
yeah,
internet.
yeah.
And he has a very interesting perspective on it.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And it makes me think a lot about, you know, where we are headed. And I don't know if you have theories on where we are headed with the internet the way it is. Like where are we going to be in about 10 or 20 years?
Oh
I mean, that's
God,
20 years is a long time in internet speak, but
I don't know.
you know,
I
where do you
mean,
think we're going to be?
I have no idea. I mean, I because we have companies toying with goggles now. I know
Yep.
that Apple has an AR goggle, augmented reality goggle lined
Hmm.
up,
Hmm.
and I feel like reality is becoming more and more mediated with
Hmm.
overlays and information and distance, and I feel it's because more and more people are talking about being present. They're
Hmm.
obsessed with being present. And like when I was a kid, that wasn't even a concept because you were just present.
Right.
You
Yeah,
had
like
no
this
choice but
is
to be
just
present.
reality.
Yeah, so
It's so HD.
I know, wow, this is
Yeah.
this 3D? Wow. Um, and so I mean it just that's kind of interesting that people are yearning for being in the world.
Hmm.
But I think that notion of being in the world itself is going to change, you
Yeah.
know. Like it used to be really, really socially unacceptable to look at your phone during dinner.
Hmm.
And it very quickly became absolutely acceptable and almost expected at this point.
Yeah,
So that's how quickly like cultural norms can change.
for sure.
I don't know. I'm not like super
Yeah.
optimistic. But that's sort of
Yeah.
like I'm trying to think of a technology that has really like made things really awesome. And
Yeah.
it's usually a mixed bag in every case I can think of.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of medical advances have been great. But when it comes to tech, I'm genuinely not sure. That's a really good question.
Well, okay. What do you think?
But
What's your prognostication?
what do I think we're going
Yeah.
to be in 20 years? Um, it is very, very hard to see a very optimistic version of this just because, you know, we've kind of seen the last 20 years.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I agree that I think augmented versions of reality are going to become a thing. And I could see some positive things with augmented reality and virtual reality, you know, people being able to go where they couldn't go before, or doctors being able to, you know, perform procedures that they couldn't before, or that kind
Hmm.
of stuff. But at the same time, you know, it's like you say, people have this yearning to be present in the world, and their solution to that is to invent things to make them more present in the world, but also just not use the things and you'll be super present in the world.
I don't know. Maybe the pendulum will swing the other way. There's all kinds of scary stuff that I think, like kids having unfettered access to limitless porn. How is that gonna
do?
Yeah, and like how is that gonna affect relationships? Will it have a net positive effect or a net negative? I don't know. Not really sure.
It's hard to think about just because I think we've seen waves of attempts for the pendulum to swing the other way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you addressed this multiple times in version 0 where, where there will be the backlash to something and people are like, oh my God, I need to quit this, or I need to do that, or and everybody let's quit this thing, or everybody let's quit. And then, it'll be this little blip and then people forget and they go back to, this addiction that we have that we cannot kick. Like even now we are doing this through Crowdcast. Like I'm gonna, get off this, check my phone. Tonight I'm probably going to scroll through all my text messages and, check my social media. This is just like a thing that I do now. And it's hard for me to think about, like if this were 20 years ago, me predicting what the future would be like 20 years from now, I would have said something that was completely off because 20 years ago, we had like the version of the internet that I now feel is kind of rosy and romantic where we were just like, genuinely, like you said, anonymous on the internet. You're asking people like ASL on like a forum, and
and it's like this, and you're like, I made a friend.
Exactly. I made a random friend who I don't even know, random pixelated person, and I'm waiting for this website, this anime website, to load, and it's got a bunch of dancing GIFs on it, and I've clicked on an image, and I'm go downstairs. Yeah, I'm gonna get a soda and wait for it while this 300 kilobyte JPEG takes like an hour to load. So.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the vision of the future was always utopian. It was like, we're gonna have flying cars, but then you're like,
is always the worst idea.
And you're like, wait a second, who's gonna make the cars? How are they gonna fly?
Collisions.
Safety, and we never thought about like telemetry information. Who's gonna manage that? And so like we just thought about the thing, like the Jetsons, Rosie the robot. We're like, we're gonna have a robot who's a maid. Okay, who makes the maid?
Right.
How does she get all of her information?
Does she have
what is she storing? What is she calling back to the home company with? And we never thought about any of that stuff. No. So I don't know. This is sort of like the time to think about that. I don't know what we'll do with it.
And it goes back to the whole, like, even if we think of it, people are creating things faster than we can think of the moral implications of any of this. So.
I really want people to interrogate capitalism, really, because that seems to be the underlying problem, is this urge to make money at any cost, any human cost. And I hear people like Bernie and AOC, and I love them because they're like really interrogating capitalism. They're like, we need to be a little more socialist, like we're socialist with firefighting, and it's worked out pretty well. So let's try it with other stuff.
Yeah, like let's stop and think about all of our heroes that we consider heroes, and they're not really part of capitalism. FDR, MLK. I mean, these are people who are thinking about the social good and really humanizing. That's their common trait, was that they kept humanizing people instead of dehumanizing them and seeing them as resources or a platform, like in technology. So I think that is really that's the real question. What form that takes, like, are we going to be wearing goggles or whatever? It's fun to think about, but the root problem is our weird urge towards making money at any cost. Absolutely, yeah. It's really depressing to think about.
I know, it's fun,
but fun to think about. It'll keep me up at night for sure. So I asked one more question, then I'm going to poke around in the ask a question. Sorry,
okay.
I forgot because we're having a lot of fun talking. So do you think you'll remain in sci-fi after this? Do you see more similar, sci-fi thrillers in your future, or what's coming up next for you?
Well, I mean, like I can't really escape online culture, Like it's such a huge part of who we are now. And I actually just sold another book called City of Orange. And it's the same editor, Mark Tavani, who helped me with this. He's brilliant. He's like, he's pointing stuff out in that book that I didn't even realize.
Wow.
And I'm playing it cool. I'm like, oh yeah, I totally meant to do that. But he's great, and he really believes in the book. It's a post-apocalyptic story about this guy who wakes up with no memory of what happened, and he's got to find out if his wife and kid are okay. And so he goes on a journey. But like that also, there's a lot of flashbacks and memories about like the world before, and the internet actually does play a big role unexpectedly. When I was writing it, I didn't think it would, but I was like,
that makes a lot of sense that it would.
Yeah. Because it I don't want to spoil it. Sorry, I'm talking too much.
No, that painted a really nice picture of just like, oh, now I want to read this book. I want to read it a lot.
Well, thanks, man. Yeah, and that's also an adult book, but yeah, I don't know. Me and Nikki are working on something together too.
Yay!
And I think that's going to be like this sort of abstracted, very high level, like thinking about internet-like behavior. It's just sort of, this is our world, and like it's always there. I don't think you can escape it, really.
No. Yeah, this is we're here. We're literally here. Yeah.
Here we are.
Okay, let me look through the questions from our listeners. What is your? Oh wait, I think we may have answered this one. What is your writing process like?
Writing process.
Yeah, what is your writing process like? I know you had mentioned that it's kind of like headlights.
There's.
Go ahead.
Like a loose outline, because I wrote a tight outline once and it was terrible. There's some part of your brain that turns off when you're filling in the blanks. You know what I mean? So you got to let leave some room for spontaneity. I write in the mornings until about 2, and then I run out of gas, and that's when I do like admin and correspondence and stuff like that. Or just clean out the garage,
That's exactly my schedule.
You do the same thing?
I'm a morning person. I was one of the only morning people that I know. But yeah, I do all my writing in the mornings, and if I'm on deadline, I will write in the afternoon, through the evening. But
out of fear,
out of fear, yeah. I mean, when I'm forced to. But I feel like when you're reading my books and you hit like a crappy part, it's probably written in the afternoon. Like that.
You're like, oh, I remember that part.
Yeah, I'm like, I remember that. It was 4:30 p.m. Yeah, I remember. Oh, this is a great one. How do you share your writing with Nicola, with your wife, and how does she share with you? Do you share chapter by chapter, and do you share your outlines before?
Dude, she's been working on a book like this whole pandemic, and she's nuts. Like she's like writing in longhand in notebooks with her head down, like she's back in high school, and then she types it in, and that's another layer of her editing process, And I know broadly what it's about, but I don't know what happens, and she's not gonna let me see it until it's ready to present. But we are always the first readers of our work, always.
I love that.
Yeah, and that's our relationship. We met in writing school at Emerson College, so we met in a writing workshop, and that's never changed.
Yeah, you guys are truly one of my favorite couples. You guys are so cute and so sweet together. I love it so much.
It's bad though, because it's like she'll read something of mine and she'll be like, this part, and I'm like, I know, and that's the conversation.
I Primo does a similar thing to me, because he's usually my first reader, and he's also got to the point where he's just like, if he doesn't like it, he's just like, no, this is so boring. And then I would get mad. And then like 48 hours later, I'm like, you're right.
I hate that. I hate that.
And every time.
It's always that denial you got to go through.
Yeah. I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about.
You know who I am. You're right.
I'm like, oh, you know what? Fine.
I know. Yeah.
Ripping it out.
I'll do better.
Oh, this is a good one. How do you unwind after spending so much time researching and writing about the dark aspects of technology? That's really interesting, because I remember I had coping mechanisms too.
Oh yeah, I like to make video games. So I'm using like Unity and Construct to just make my own games, or like I'll build Lego, or I'll read a book, like a paper book, or I'll play a video game. And I'll just replay like Zelda, Link to the Past, or I'll play Simon's Cat on my iPad.
Yeah.
Because it's just, brain turns off. So stuff like that is really, really important. And knowing that like I can only write for about 6 hours a day.
Yeah.
And that's it. I've tried to do more and it just sucks. So really taking care of yourself and mixing it up with experiment, like playing the drums or playing piano. That's a good way to just like to take your mind off of stuff and remind you that you're a physical being in space.
Yeah, I remember. That's such an interesting thing that you just said, because I remember feeling that way when I was writing Warcross, this sense of being kind of unmoored from reality. Just the longer I was working on that book, and I was like, I gotta go outside. I gotta go smell some flowers and.
Is that what you did? Like just go for walks and stuff?
Yeah, I took a lot of walks during that. Yeah, I remember I started writing more notebooks around that time too. And so now I always have a notebook. And I remember also this was around the time when Nikki and I went on a writing retreat with some other authors. And I remember that was my first time.
I remember that.
Watching Nikki at work, and she was writing longhand in her notebooks. And so now I always have a notebook with me. And I was just like, that is so, I just loved it. It was so fascinating watching her work. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, she would do that at her job too. She would write, because she was a programmer, a coder, and she would write pseudocode longhand on legal pads.
Wow!
Before doing her code, like she's just like she hasn't forgotten what it's like to be a physical person in the world. Yeah,
I think that's so, and I think the older I get, the more into that I get. You need to be physical. Like our mutual friend Tada Mafi and Ransom Riggs, Tada was like, she says she got a dumb phone recently, just like it just texts and makes phone calls and that's it.
Is it like that light phone or whatever?
Yeah, maybe.
I love that. I love dumb phones. They're so cool.
Yeah, she's like, I got a dumb phone, and they get like a real paper delivered to them that they read.
And Ransom shoots on film, like
right, and I love that, and I think the older I get, the more I want to go in that direction. And anyway, sorry, I'm getting off track now, but yeah, I that what you said really resonated with me, with this need to like do physical things to remind myself that I'm like a physical person.
Totally. Yeah.
I think we're hitting up against the end of the thing. So this was so fun, David. Sorry, go ahead.
Do we have any more questions? Or
I'm not sure if I'm clicking the right. Oh, we answered. Okay, and then we've got a couple that were unanswered. Okay, so let's maybe. Okay, this is a great one to end on. If you want to answer, what are your favorite and least favorite apps or pieces of technology?
Oh God. Okay, you need to answer this too. I hate social media in any form. It's a nonstop envy machine that'll make you just feel like crap. No matter how good you're doing, it'll make you feel like crap. And my favorite pieces are games. The dude who, whatever Mr. Williams, who made Defender back in the day, it's like an old school 80s video game.
Yeah.
He has this great quote, which is like, computer games are the only legitimate use for computer technology. I was like, that is so cool.
I agree. Games are awesome. And I agree with both of the things you said, because you know how recently Instagram had a thing where like an alert, because I'm always on my phone, that said, oh, you can turn off your likes now, or you can turn off like how many likes you can see from people. And I did it right away. I was like, I don't want to know.
That's good, actually.
Yeah, and I genuinely felt a sense of relief when I was scrolling Instagram today. Like, I don't have to see a number,
I mean, because like,
I don't have to see it.
Like we used to say, like, I'm not a number, you can't reduce me. But now, not only are we the number, where our follower counts and like counts and blah, 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 we actually like it. And that's the surprising thing for me, is that we like it.
Yeah, and we want more of it.
That's how powerful this stuff is. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I agree with that. Like, I think Twitter is my least favorite app that I've ever used, because it has given me more stress and grief than probably any other app that I've ever used in my life.
Yeah, and it's like a fire hose, except with fire coming out of it.
Actual fire coming out of it every day at all hours. I'm like, how can you sustain this level of stress? And anyway, I like Twitter when it's about earthquakes and checking, earthquake reports. I'm like, did you feel that too?
Yeah, did you feel
great. Not just crazy. And talked maybe only by Facebook, which was the OG giver of stress before I just quit it completely.
Disinformation machine. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. I love, of course, I love games. And I used to work in games. I also love Photoshop. Like, I think art technology I really enjoy. Like, that has given me a lot of like zen, you know.
Yeah.
Kind of the similar way with painting. I think there's definitely a joy in obviously painting by hand, but it's nice to have painting on the go as well, sketching on the go.
For sure. Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
So,
yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Hello.
Mira's back.
Yeah, I'm back. Hello. So thank you so much, Marie, David. That was such like a fun and dark talk in some parts, but I think a lot of our listeners enjoyed the conversation. Again, we do have signed book plates available. Just make sure to write signed book plate in the order comments when you're checking out your cart. Also, for those of you who tuned in late, don't worry. We have a replay available shortly after the broadcast ends, and we'll be uploading this onto YouTube as well in the near future. And I think that about covers it. Congratulations again, David.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thanks for having me. Like, you guys, I miss going to Vroman's.
We miss having
you.
It. One day we will return to
back.
going to physical bookstores. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, have a good night, everyone. Stay safe. All right.
You guys too.
All right. Thanks, Marie.
So fun.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.